I'm Patrick Compton. Welcome to Polymath Park. Today we're going to be exploring some ideas I've been working on for expanding our capacity for gratitude and humility. This one's going to involve some complex terminology, but bear with me, I promise all these terms will have pragmatic application in your everyday life. In his lecture series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, which I highly recommend to everyone, John Vervaeke describes what he calls salience landscaping. This essentially describes taking note of what is salient to you, what stands out in your everyday life, the landscape of what is most relevant to you. This is a landscape that most of us would benefit greatly from expanding upon. Additionally, a side effect of expanding one's salience landscape is the expansion of one's capacity for gratitude. The things that previously did not stand out may suddenly become much more salient to us. Even a pencil can be a source of humility and gratitude. Let me explain. At the beginning of the COVID pandemic, there was talk of people engaging in gratitude exercises due to the supply chain issues. People were put into a position where they had to ask themselves, just what goes into making it such that this pencil is now in my possession? How many hands were involved in bringing this package of writing utensils to my doorstep? Furthermore, could I even make a pencil myself? Tim Urban plays with this idea in some of his writings. He observes that, well, I'd need access to a mining company that mines graphite, I'd need access to a rubber company that strips rubber bark, a lumber company to process the wood, and an aluminum company that can make the little cylinders that connect the pencil to the eraser, and so on and so forth. Our society depends so heavily upon this chain of interacting factors, this amorphous chain that unites all of us. Come now, join me in a low-effort exercise, won't you? Here I am in a typical suburban kitchen. Okay, so extend your arm, I know, bear with me, with your pointer finger held out, and slowly begin moving it around the room. As your finger lands on each object, try to reflect on how it has impacted and benefited your life, and how its history has resulted in its emergence in your kitchen. For instance, I'm now looking in my kitchen at an artsy mug on the counter. I can only imagine how many hands went into helping this mug arrive at my door. Wrapped so perfectly in its bubble wrap and made in China, my gratitude extends to these unseen workers. These are people I will likely never meet, but to whom I still owe gratitude. I shift my finger to the left and am now pointing at a hand-woven hand towel with stitched designs of lighthouses adorning its soft but resilient textures. This towel has been in the family for so long. I continue to pan my finger around the room, across a potato masher, a banana, a digital oven, some cool cats, and cookies for Santa. Neurologically speaking, every time I focus, my brain is performing tens or hundreds of computations every second when I'm looking at an object. The qualities of the object that are relevant to my knowledge, and the constantly subconsciously brewing ideas in my imagination, snap together through the neuroplastic alteration of connections between my neurons. This allows me to experience cascades of neuron activity that equate to feelings of humility and gratitude through the widening of my perspective. As I finally complete an entire circle, I drop my arm, and adjust my focus, humbled as I look around, now viewing my kitchen in a very different light. Alrighty, that was fun. Now let's take a step outside and see if we can't change how we see what we see. I now retrieve my obnoxiously complex integration device from my pocket and pull up a saved image of the Hubble Ultra Deep Field. It's 10,000 galaxies shimmering brilliantly in the darkness. What a feat of human engineering it is to extend our vision out to such reaches. They really captured light from 14 billion years ago in this shot, and I can hold that image in my mind as I point my finger to the sky, knowing that that image can fit inside 1/10 of my fingernail. This means that there are an average of 100,000 galaxies behind my fingernail at any given time. I can imagine these galaxies superimposed on my fingernail, rolling across it like film in a camera as I slowly scroll my finger across the cosmos. Let us now shrink our perspectives down from the macroverse to the microverse and examine this finger conduit through which we have been perceiving. The average fingernail is about 35 cells thick, each cell containing about 42 million molecules. As I start to feel a breeze against my finger, I unconsciously tense my arm muscles to resist the air resistance. The resistance of the air molecules against my hand becomes suddenly lightened as I extend my hand out, like a blade cutting through a thick soup of nitrogen and oxygen. Just like it does in the water. Just like a boat paddle and a plane wing, it interacts with these forces and changes and is changed by the medium in which it resides. In neurophenomenology, we call this a dynamic system. Everything in life is affected by entropy, existing in a fluid dynamic state that we all play in. What a privilege it is to more fully comprehend and participate in these fundamental physics of nature. I extend my finger back out. A scab is still healing on my first knuckle from the arduous stocking of heavy tile onto metal shelves at my work. I admire my glial cells hard at work, sent through the 3,000 veins that go through my wrist, aiding in the cleanup process. I admire how they sacrifice specific resources, or life, to preserve the overall organism, or host, depending on how you define life. I retract my hand and gaze out at the sunset, aware of how the color and angle of the light I absorb triggers my suprachiasmatic nucleus to regulate cortisol and adrenaline production, which tells all of the cells in my body when it's time to start waking up. David Foster Wallace says that the key to life is to be unboreable. We can achieve this state of unboreableness by finding more ways to become more interested in everything, and finding pleasure in as many things as possible through the expansion of our Salience landscape. Now, you can call this retroactive gratitude or Salience landscape expansion, call it whatever you want. This is a great tool that we have at our disposal at all times to help us get more out of our lives, to make our lives more meaningful, salient, and enriching. Now, personally, when I do this exercise, I experience what's called positively valenced paresthesia in the science community. This is, in French, it's known as frisson, or just the chills. Now, I won't go into details on this. I'm going to have another video on this in the future. But the reason it's called positively valenced paresthesia is because it's triggered by a positive source as opposed to a negative valence. So you can have your hair stand on end on the back of your neck from nails on a chalkboard, which is unpleasant, and also from a very powerful scene in a movie or a really heavy breakdown in a metal song. It just depends on the source and the context of the source that's triggering this adrenal production of paresthesia. Part 2. Humility and the Umwelt. Now, we've explored the macroverse and the microverse, the incredibly complex microcosms that make up the cells that make up you, and the incredibly vast and expansive universe that gave way to the elements that eventually became you. What we've been talking about thus far is the expansion of the Umwelt. I'm just going to give you the dictionary definition and the origin of this word. So this was arrived at by von Uexküll, I think is how you say it, back in the 20th century. The Uexküll realized that life is shaped around our senses. Therefore, species develop within a concrete framework of their reality that's based around how they use their senses. These senses are things that we've been expanding upon for hundreds of years now. The common English interpretation of the Umwelt now is basically the contingencies and constraints that we're limited by with our senses and that we can expand upon. It is the means by which we perceive and integrate with our reality. There's a distinction to be made here between the Umwelt and the word perspective. Our perspective more so deals with psychology and the inner narrative through which we conduct our lives. It is through the utility of the telescope and the microscope that one can most directly and cognitively expand on what is most salient to them, and subsequently widen their perspective and garner humility. Since Galileo Galilei first expanded on Hans Lippershey's spyglass in 1609, a year after its invention, the human visual system has never quite been viewed the same. The telescope most literally expanded our Umwelt into a hitherto unforeseen world, leading to the discovery that we are indeed not the center of our universe, striking a stark contrast to many millennia of cultural and theocratic belief systems. The revelations of Galileo and Copernicus set forth a religious upheaval, landing many a philosopher and scientist in jail for their conclusions. Since Zacharias Janssen first invented the microscope, we came to realize that we are not simply a singular physical entity, but rather we occupy a land of bacteria, microorganisms that outnumber us 1 billion to 1, and since then, medicine has subsequently flourished. We tend to take these inventions for granted. Our medical science, the GPS in our cell phones, our nutritional supplements and vitamins, all of these come from the Umwelt expansion provided by the advent of the microscope and the telescope. We now begin to fully realize our cellular union. We are the captains of a very sophisticated ship, leaders of a colony of microorganisms with which we share deep symbiosis, swaying and dictating the fate of trillions of cells and bacteria. We're like gods to our microcosm. We're like We now live in a radically different world than the one we occupied just a few hundred years ago, and largely take it for granted because we lack a well-developed capacity for introspection. We are left to compartmentalizing our reality because of our brain's prerogative to take the path of least resistance. To consider all the options of the time would lead to information overload or combinatorial explosion. In much of the West, at least in public schools, students aren't really encouraged to introspect, to work around this innate closed-mindedness. And many have proposed that this is intentional at some level, because a deep thinker does not make for a good cog in the machine. Keeping this perspective in mind, the long perspective of human history, we can more easily reside in a state of gratitude and humility, through Chronosonder, which we explored in the last video. Now, I don't mean to insinuate that there isn't plenty to be worried about, plenty to feel indifferent about in your situation in reality, or weirded out by your middle-sized existence between the macro and the microcosms. All I'm trying to do here is propose more ways for us to smell the roses. We'll talk about this some more in a future video as well. We imitate and improve upon many aspects of the human visual system through cameras and telescopes and microscopes, and the same concept applies to microphones. We expand upon what we hear in the world. We can increase and repair damaged hearing, and we can now hear many of the wild sounds from around the world that only about 100 years prior we had zero access to. For example, when we watch things like documentaries, we can be transported to places that our species has had no knowledge of up until very recently, and cultures that we've never been able to appreciate so deeply before. We expand our perspective about the world by looking and hearing through these inventions. We capture more brilliance than the eye can achieve, and more crisp clarity than the eardrum can reproduce. So we most literally are expanding on our Umwelt at an astonishing rate. I can't see how we can't be grateful and humbled by the fact that we have access to literally expanding on the way that we integrate with our reality to such a profound degree. Only recently have we really begun to form these terms, the microverse and the macroverse, between which we remain stable, homeostatically bounded, and balanced. Now, I do want to emphasize that introspection, gratitude, and humility tend to come more naturally to some than others, except in our ability to stumble upon these feelings, these embodied states, from what we call peak experiences, like standing at the top of a mountain and looking out, or standing out from the moon and looking back at Earth. And I imagine it's more naturally restricted and constrained by the more capitalist having mode versus being mode that we see in the West, or at least in the United States culture. Jordan Peterson talks about these experiences as rendering a relative state of awe, which he says can naturally trigger these states of deep introspection. Looking farther outward allows us to look more deeply inward. This state of awe is something profound, to be sure, and it is something that our species has experienced throughout all time, I would imagine. And in reflecting on this, one can attain a state of happiness and connectedness to all other humans. With this newfound knowledge, we can begin to see the universe as unfolding, as it has since its beginning, as Spinoza seems to observe in his writings. As Spinoza says, "I will consider human actions and appetites as if it were a question of lines, planes, and bodies. Everything in life is causal, everything is connected through the laws of physics." There are many beliefs and cultural systems that emphasize the idea of everything being connected, and this concept was largely the message of the hippie movement back in the 60s. In this video, I really want to emphasize that this is a message that has been professed by science as well. Through first principles thinking, through the scrutinous, objective examination of our reality, we may arrive at countless sources of wonder and humility. And through the lens of scrutiny, we have the added bonus of embodying these messages of connection and gratitude through the most rational means possible, through the sources that are the most grounded in reality. Everything is causal and calculable. Every action affects something else. Everything in this life is connected. The smallest actions that we take have butterfly effects down the line. Part 3. Universal Gratitude. What are some other means of establishing lasting gratitude? I propose that one can find endless sources of gratitude and humility from the study of entomology. Yes, the seemingly simple study of insects. Examining the creative ways that evolution has created species that outnumber us 1,000,000,000 to 1 is endlessly enthralling and entertaining if one keeps an open mind. This is the point that I really wish to emphasize with this video, that no matter the field of study, culture, philosophy, one can always overlay the physics and chemistry of the universe that is involved in that, and in turn arrive at a universally implicit state of humility and subsequently gratitude. This universal gratitude grows with every new field that a polymath dips their toes into, and retaining this universal perspective upon entering a new field will benefit the learner that much more. In other words, in embodying the idea that we are a universe experiencing itself through a Homo sapiens sensory motor system, we can value our rare chance at acquiring and spreading such knowledge that much more. And we can also find value and gratitude in the ability to have access to such mind-blowing knowledge. We are the means by which the universe learns about itself, the means by which it introspects and interprets itself. Many have described the grand purpose of the human endeavor to be universal autobiographers, for we are indeed the means by which the universe records itself. One can consciously and volitionally approach a new field with this universal state of gratitude and embodiment by asking questions like, what would a universe attempting to perceive itself through this type of carbon-based amalgamation do? How should I best proceed in this reality given my organism's apparent endogenous genetic restrictions and abilities? From this framework, we would surely gain more from the subject that we're studying, or at least feel better about participating in the learning process. Furthermore, I would propose that because of this universal inhabitance, literally every experience should be humbling, gratifying, and gratitude-inducing. And ideally, we would always be looking for ways to not only expand our umvelt and our perspective, but find whatever means possible to connect on a deeper level with all of our fellow humans. Through these various fields of study, or through mindfulness meditation, or whatever practice you want to engage in my opinion, to get the most out of this life, you would want to make it such that you can be more connected with other people on a real deep level, not on a superficial social media level. It is primarily nothing but a privilege to interact with every human being. Even when my boss comes up and says things that are unnecessarily judgmental, it is still nothing but a privilege to interact with this version of the universe experiencing itself. Now, taking this framework to its extreme, I could say, yes, I will smile when you beat me, because I know that you are misguided. I know that you are in a place in your life where you are likely suffering more than I am. And I pity you in that regard, but before pity, I relate to you, because it should be primarily absolutely mind-blowing that we're interacting with other speaking universes. I mean, it sounds weird to say it like this, but I've been living by this framework for a while now, and it's really working well for me. You are the most complex organism that we know that exists, so at its base level, it should be nothing but astonishing that we are here interacting and engaging together. To me, this universal knowledge, this universal gratitude always takes priority in every situation. To me, the order of perspectives should be relation over pity over anger. But we'll talk about this more in a future video. Now let's look at some of the neurochemistry involved in gratitude. Andrew Huberman talks about how the best gratitude exercises, those that promote the most neuroplasticity, are those that involve us watching other people be gratified or be complimented on their achievements. Additionally, watching people when they struggle and overcome those struggles, it seems to not only inspire us, but having neuroplastic effects that not only carry on throughout the day, but possibly for months afterwards. So today we looked at a couple ways to directly expand our perspectives and increase our capacity for gratitude and humility, ways that I hope can be appreciated by the theist and the atheist alike. As Vervaeke might put it, we've engaged a participatory knowledge that's afforded us a procedural knowledge through the expansion of our Salience landscape and our Umwelt. This is done through the use of tools, be these tools philosophical or physical, arrived at by logic and reason or by science. So what we've been discussing today are mental frameworks. Mental frameworks are something that we're always using. We're always putting our lives in some perspective, and unfortunately a lot of times that perspective, that personal narrative that we have going on, is acquired unconsciously. What I want to emphasize with these kind of videos is that we should be seeking to have agency over our personal narrative, or at least be continuously seeking reason and seeking a rational approach to integrating with our reality. I've been referencing John Vervaeke a lot in this video, but in his lecture series he uses a really good example. He says, "My framing is often transparent to me," which is just fantastic. Glasses, frames, and that's exactly that. We're always looking through some type of mental framework, and when we take that off for a bit, when we examine our mental framework, that's when the real work happens. That's when real change happens. That's when we have a paradigm shift. As far as we know, we are the universe's grandest manifestations, the vessels of its experience. It is only through the constrained, constitutive elements at our disposal that we can gain knowledge of how to best experience that manifested experience. It is through the altruistic, non-judgmental, and clear-minded observation of all of our species' interactions that we may garner this sense of universal gratitude and humility. I see the history of our species' evolution, the struggles that we have borne, the paradoxes that continue to perplex us, and how they weigh heavily on you. I see these elements that constrain your perspective and restrict your ability to best integrate with your reality. I also see your evolutionary advantages and your potential. Because of this, I recognize the light in you. I recognize the incredibly complex and cohesive structures within you, and I recognize your godlike qualities. If we are the gods of our own universe, then I bow to the God within you. And the most literal translation of this form of respect and salutation is Namaste. So, Namaste, my friends. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Viewers can access the Polymath Park Patreon here. Programs like this exist solely by donation, so feel free to contribute whatever you feel this video is worthy. Anything's appreciated.